Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and we're going to talk about the influencerification of Dungeons and Dragons. So first of all, let me quote my sources here. Um, Over on Ghostfire Games, fantastic podcast. I highly recommend watching that. It's really good. It has Sean Merwin, who is the number one man in the world responsible, in my humble opinion, for the success of D&D partner content section on um, over on D&D Beyond. He brought, I think the template. He specifically helped he helped multiple projects reach the level of quality to become D&D official canon from a third party origination, right? So Dungeons and Drakenheim, that setting is Dungeons and Dragons canon now, right? Humblewood, Dungeons and Dragons canon. That's incredible, right? But let me stay focused here. Over on Ghostfire Games podcast, with James Hake and Dale Kingsmill and Sean Merwin and one guy from Australia who I just don't know his name yet. They all came in and they did a phenomenal. They really, you have to take a look. They have a great podcast, but they said the influencerification of of TTRPGs. Now I think that's wrong. Influencerification is a real thing. Influencerification. It's a little bit of a mouthful, but I think it really perfectly describes this major trend that we really are seeing in Dungeons and Dragons, not in tabletop role playing games. So, like influencer, Matthew Mercer. Matthew Mercer made a tabletop role playing game, Candela Obscura. Nobody cared. Nobody cared. Actually, they did care until it came out, and they were like, "Oh, you just did a refried beans copy of John Harper's Blades in the Dark, and didn't hire John Harper? What are you kidding?" Like, and so people were pretty appalled. Like, and Candela Obscura like can't really get many views now, and like the character sheet on comicdon.com is really holding up Candela Obscura as, hey, if you want to make a non-fantasy game, you could do that, but the world is not going to care. The world is not going to. The world is genuinely not going to reward you for making non-fantasy tabletop role-playing games. I was like, you know what? I think they pretty right about that. Like that seems to be kind of right on point as far as that seems really accurate, right? But the influencerification of Dungeons and Dragons is extremely real. All right, so let's talk about the influencers who right now are are putting up competitors for Dungeons and Dragons, and then Dungeons and Dragons is having to make moves to pacify them, right? Like not to pacify them, but to take them off the board as competitors, right? So let's go right through the top influencers who are doing this right now. So, so let's tick them off. Matthew Mercer, number one in the world, right? And Daggerheart, Daggerheart is still technically a competitor of Dungeons and Dragons, and no question, the D&D hating the anti D&D community really is putting a lot of hopes on that game to be a D&D killer. I I don't think it has any hopes of being. I really don't think it has any hopes of being a real D&D killer, and the reason why is Spencer Stark. Spencer Stark delivered. Spencer Stark specifically delivered. He specifically delivered the Candela Obscura, and it failed by every single metric. Right, it's just an abominable failure, and I really feel that Daggerheart deserves to fail because Critical Role is so lazy that they are like, well, we already delivered a DOA game. Let's have that guy create the next game that everybody is hoping is going to beat D&D. Like that level of cowardice and that level of laziness, as far as like fixing the problem and getting somebody who can actually move the needle, like I kind of feel like Daggerheart deserves to fail, right? Like that Spencer Stark is the problem. He delivered a DOA game. Why on earth you would ask him to deliver another DOA game? which is already happening. Like, people are looking at it and going, nah, this ain't gonna go nowhere. You're dumping a bunch of time into creating cards that people can choose to use or not to use. And also, what's the experience at the table? Like, half the people are using cards, half aren't. Like, it's gonna be a hot mess. It's a hot mess. Like, I really feel that Daggerheart is not gonna go anywhere. Matthew Mercer is very real. He is an influencer, and he is absolutely part of the influencer-ification of Dungeons and Dragons. Now, he was a real threat, right? Hasbro took care of that threat. Matthew Mercer is simply a writer in Dungeons and Dragons stable at this point. Darrington presses books. You can find him right there on D&D Beyond, right? Like, Mercer's already bowed the knee. He's literally on the D&D payroll. Like, he gets a check from them, right? Like, you're not gonna beat somebody that you get a check from, right? Like, like you're not gonna be in competition with somebody you're getting a check from every month. That's ludicrous. And MCDM is in the same boat. So Matthew Coleville, right? The Influencerafication of D&D. He was a real competitor. He has bended the knee, right? He's off the board at this point. He gets a check from them. You're not a real competitor from anybody that you get a check from every month, right? Like, it's ridiculous. Right, like, it's ridiculous that the anti-D&D community still considers him a competitor, but he is absolutely part of the influencerification of D&D. These influencers come out, they are a real threat, and then D&D needs to put them in the stable. Right, you're the stable boy now. Take care of the horses. Right, hard to run a revolution when you're combing horses. Right, all right. So let's talk about an influencer who has not been cowed yet, right? Like, who has not been put into the stables, right, to brush the horses there. And that is Dungeon Coach with DC20. That's a real competitor, right? It's coming out. It's being kickstarted right now. And honestly, I think he's in the same boat where he could be a real competitor for Dungeons and Dragons. DC20 could be a real competitor for Dungeons and Dragons. And so Dungeons and Dragons, I almost certainly believe that everybody kickstartering DC20, you're literally just paying for partnered content under Dungeons and Dragons. I think that's where that whole thing is going to land. But it was a great like language to say influencerification of they said tabletop role-playing games. That's not correct. Nobody cares if you make anything that is not a direct competitor to Dungeons and Dragons. It really is influencerification of Dungeons and Dragons. And also, let's be clear, I don't really think the TTRPG space really exists, right? There's Dungeons and Dragons. There's people who make content that is Farm League Dungeons and Dragons. And then there's a bunch of people who are making some story games. I don't really think the TTRPG space is robust enough to even warrant the term TTRPG industry, in my humble opinion. Every single word you just heard is my humble opinion. What's important is when I get to hear your humble opinion. When you get in the comments and send your content, please consider like, subscribing, and have a fetch millennium.